This is a tale of trauma and tragedy, a tale of ambition and dreams larger than life, and one of the best stories told in the world of Pokemon. So let's talk about it. Hey James, it's Charles. How are you today? Nobody walks into a Pokemon game expecting a story on par with that of other long-running JRPG series like Dragon Quest, Kingdom Hearts, or even Paper Mario, because the focus has always been squarely on catching monsters, battling, and the real-life interactions that the games promote among their players. But as far as mainline Pokemon game stories are concerned, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet actually did a pretty good job with its narrative. As you may know, the games actually have 3 distinct storylines that converge into one epic finale: Victory Road, Starfall Street, and Path of Legends. But today we will be focusing specifically on the epic finale, the key events that led up to it, and the professor at the center of everything. Of course, depending on whether or not you are playing Pokemon Scarlet or Violet, either Professor Sada or Professor Turo will be the game's version exclusive professor, but their stories are identical aside from the past versus future angle, and the obvious. So because I played Scarlet, and because I personally found that the maternal angle hit a little bit harder, and because we are going to simply roll with Professor Sada from here on out. Anywho toots, today's plan is to 1. Break down what the game wants you to believe, 2. Dig into the truth of Professor Sada's story, and 3. Discuss what the heck it all means. And as always, it's going to be a good time, so kindly subscribe to bump us a little bit closer to the big 100, and let's bust out the juicy nuggets right after I show you a cool game environment that I made with the sponsor of today's video, Yahaha. Yahaha is a new user-generated content creation platform that allows anyone to create and share their own interactive 3D multiplayer experiences online, all without a shred of coding experience thanks to Yahaha Studio's gigantic library of templates, game components, and smart assets. Last time we talked about Yahaha, I showed you a chill space I made to hang out in, but today we have something a little bit different. A Japan-inspired space to enjoy over the holidays, since Weiwei and I are not in Japan for Christmas this year. And all I had to do to get this together was select a template, then drag, drop, and tweak assets from Yahaha's enormous library to set the place off. So what do you think of our little piece of Japan away from Japan? By the way, Yahaha regularly holds live community sessions to help creators improve their skills, so feel free to follow Yahaha on Twitch or check out their past sessions on YouTube to get the hot tips. Anyways, turning your creative ideas into fun, virtual games and publishing them online to enjoy with friends in the Yahaha universe is a ton of fun, so be sure to click the link in the description to begin creating your dream games in Yahaha for free. Thanks to Yahaha for sponsoring this video, and with that said, have fun creating, sharing, and playing, and let's move forward to today's chat. Early on in Pokemon Scarlet, we are introduced to 2 key characters. Arvin, an upperclassman at the Naranja Academy who happens to be researching healthy recipes to improve the vitality of Pokemon, for some reason, and Professor Sada, a Pokemon researcher working at a site known as Area Zero deep within the Great Crater of Paldea, who happens to be Arvin's mother, and a pretty bad mother at that, for some reason. When you first meet Arvin, he's surprised to see you traveling with the somewhat debilitated Koraidon that he, in fact, used to live with, but he's also more than content to see the back of the no, that's not actually a wheel dragon thing. As for Professor Sada, you first encounter her when she makes a video call to Naranja Academy via Director Clavel, whereupon she mentions that she is aware you met her son and asks that you continue to take good care of Koraidon. When your friend Nimona later broaches the topic of Arvin's mother in a conversation with him, it turns out to be as touchy of a subject as that of Koraidon. Because as it turns out, Professor Sada had more or less abandoned Arvin to focus on her own research in the crater back when he was a child, and Koraidon is somewhat of a symbol of that abandonment. Apparently, Professor Sada had one day discovered Koraidon in Area Zero and brought it to the surface to live with Arvin, only for it to cause so much trouble that Professor Sada took it back down into the crater and thereafter stayed there with it. As such, Arvin blamed Koraidon for his negligent mother's attention again being stolen away from him, and came to resent the monster about as much as he resents Professor Sada, particularly when, sometime after returning to the crater, she cuts off communications with him altogether. Speaking about his mother, he says the following: "As a parent, she's the worst. All she ever does is work. She never comes home. I do not have a single memory of her even playing with me, her own kid. Mabostif's the only one who has ever been there for me. Always. No dad, no mom, no nanny, no pub crawling auntie, just a single friend Mr. Dog. Furthermore, one day Mabosstiff and Arven even traveled down into the crater to search for Professor Sada, only for Mabosstiff to suffer a terrible injury from a rampaging, otherworldly Pokémon. An event that caused Arven to double down on his bitter feelings towards his mother and her monster, and pushing him to set out in pursuit of the legendary Herba Mystica with hopes of healing Mabosstiff. And so Pokemon Scarlet and Violet devotes much of its time to exploring these elements of its narrative. Arven, the neglected son with just one friend in all the world, Arven's quest to save that one friend from a terrible injury, gradually depleting its life force. Professor Sada, a woman so lost in her ambition that she sacrificed her own family, and in both a literal and a figurative sense, the great crater that ties the entire narrative together, a place both wonderful and monstrous. And if you ask me, a place symbolic of the space wherein ambitions and madness intersect, wherein dreams and nightmares collide, and a metaphorical space we all need to brave, but brave with care if we want a shot at achieving greatness. As the person literally living in the literal crater, in a way Professor Sada is always the focal point of this narrative. Yet, for much of the game we are left with a perplexing question. Why did the professor suddenly shut Arven out? Because she wanted to keep him safe? Because she simply never cared about him? Because she resents him along with his estranged father? Or because she's simply too focused on her research to even think about him? At the end of the day, the answer to this question hardly even matters, because the Professor Sada we think we all know is in fact nothing more than a lie. And that lie unravels once we finally descend into the great Paldean crater and begin to explore Area 0. When the three storylines of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet converge, our heroes must finally dive bomb down into the Great Paldean Crater to locate Professor Sada and unlock the mystery of Area 0. And I must say that arriving in Area 0 for the first time is a surreal experience. Like the abyss of the aptly named Maiden Abyss, Area 0 feels natural, beautiful, and organic, but at the same time, something about it feels unpleasant, as the aura of the world beneath the fog is eerie, uncanny, perhaps even sinister, and the otherworldly, droning choir chants that feel all too out of place in the Pokemon world drive that feeling home. Upon arrival, Professor Sada has us travel to 4 aging research stations to unlock the door to her laboratory, but we gradually get the sense that in doing so, something is about to go terribly wrong. And when the party eventually arrives at the 4th and final research station, only to find the place in ruins, Sada once again contacts the group over the intercom. However, when she takes to the waves, her speech is choppy, incoherent, and just before the connection is cut, we hear her utter something unsettling, initiating restart. Of course, she later calls back and blames the bizarre nature of the call on signal interference, but if you've played Metal Gear Solid 2, you know that signal interference is a load of baloney, and so does Arven. And when we finally do arrive in the Zero Lab, we encounter something every bit as inhuman as you would expect. Unfortunately, our friends end up trapped outside, battling for their lives against a throng of powerful Pokemon who look both familiar and unfamiliar, and we are left with no choice but to enter the Zero Lab alone. And when we do, we see Professor Sada seated in a chair in the corner, but her head is awkwardly tilted downwards, vacant eyes staring at the floor. Something is absolutely wrong with the professor. Then, eyes fixed at the ground, she speaks. Human presence detected within the Zero Lab, she says, as if nothing human had been there before your arrival. Deactivating sleep mode. Professor Sada's eyes then gleam red, and she twitches her way to her feet to reveal the truth about the Koraidon you have been traveling with, the truth about what she, or rather it, actually is, and the truth about what happened to the real Professor Sada down in the depths of the crater. As it turns out, the Professor Sada before our eyes is nothing more than a mechanical construct imbued with artificial intelligence and the memories of the real Professor Sada, who was grievously injured at Research Station 4 years ago, when she threw herself in front of Koraidon to protect it in an incident that destroyed the station. Professor Sada is dead. And she has been dead for quite some time. This is to say that even when we were first introduced to Professor Sada at Naranja Academy via Director Clavel, the real Professor Sada had already passed on long ago, and that AI Sada, her successor, and the Zero Lab's new caretaker had taken over in her stead. Suddenly we understand why Arven stopped receiving correspondence from his mother a few years ago. Suddenly we see the logical apparatus that determined it best to shield him from the dangers of Area 0 by cutting him off off completely, and suddenly things take a turn for the worse. AI Sada reveals that the reason she brought us here was to try and put a stop to a time machine that the original professor had created. A machine that even now is tirelessly continuing to pull powerful ancient Pokémon into the present, heaving the entire world's ecosystem into peril. After taking an elevator deep down into the depths of the crater, we arrive at a chamber containing the time machine that the real Sada had been developing. And it's here that AI Sada warns us, if you try to stop the machine, I will most likely attack you. Artificial being that I am, my own desires can be overridden by the system's programming. Indeed, despite its own desire to do exactly the opposite, AI Sada had been programmed to defend the time machine at all costs, further explaining that its battle skills are peerless, and you can see where this is going. Sure enough, we activate the termination process, AI Sada enters sleep mode, and the offensive protocol is activated. Please, defeat me, she begs, as her own free will is stripped from her body. Her eyes then close, and when they reopen, the whites have turned steely blue. An emotionless machine is ready to make cold and clinical work out of us. At last, my dream is within my reach, and you are not getting in my way, she screams, and the big battle finally breaks out. Past versus present, dreams versus reality, and the creator's will versus the created scheme, along with those who have rallied to its cause. Of course, in the end, the good guys prevail, and when Arvin arrives at the scene of the victory, thus far unaware of the truth about his mother, he asks the thing that has taken on his mother's appearance what it truly is. And after thanking everyone for stopping the time machine, she turns to Arvin and says,
So proud of you, my story begins. So Arvin.
Only for an alarm system to cut her off as a brand new menace emerges to eliminate the threat to the time machine. Even AI Sada is shocked at the unexpected escalation, exclaiming, was keeping the time machine running truly all the professor cared about? And with that, AI Sada is disabled and the Paradise Protection Protocol is initialized. You will fall here, within this garden paradise, and achieve nothing in the end. It threatens, towering above us as a twisted deity on Earth. And the disturbing thing is that in essence, this is the real voice of the real Professor Sada. The logical, caring AI Sada had kept the consequences of the real Professor Sada's insanity in check, but the Paradise Protection Protocol is essentially unbridled chaos exerting the posthumous will of a dreamer gone mad. Fall and become a foundation upon which my dream may be built. The voice callously shouts down from its tower, emerging as a true calamity to us, to the world, and to Professor Sada's own son. All of the party's Pokeballs are then jammed, and the final battle plays out between our Koraidon and a second Koraidon, referred to as Koraidon, the Guardian of Paradise. But of course, in the end, our Koraidon, fundamentally the Guardian of Reality, comes out on top, the Paradise Protection Protocol is crushed, and AI Sada regains control, only to be the bearer of even more bad news, that it appears that she herself is part of the system that automatically reboots the time machine when it stops, meaning that an end cannot be put to the machine's dangerous activities for as long as AI Sada exists in the same plane of reality. In the wake of this revelation, AI Sada speaks her final words. I am sorry. You know, when I was watching you on all your adventures from down here, I felt a sense of jealousy. I envied your freedom. I wish that I too might be as free as you all, free to seek out that which I might treasure above all else, not bound. I will use the time machine to journey to the world of the ancient past that I have dreamed of. I am not going only so that the time machine can be stopped. I also cannot deny my desire to see that ancient world for myself. Is this what it feels like to have your heart race with the thrill of adventure? Arvin, I am sorry that I kept the truth from you for so long. I inherited all the thoughts and wishes of the professor, and so I understand better than any that your mother truly loved you. Having vowed to sever herself from the time machine to ensure its demise, having established autonomy over herself at long last, and having still found a way to honor the innocent essence of Professor Sada's dream, AI Sada fires up the time machine and blasts herself into the past, never to be seen again. The threat of the time machine is finally over, and yet as players we are left thinking what to make of it all. Regarding both the real and unreal sides of Professor Sada, on one hand, AI Sada essentially functions as a benevolent AI, even a martyr of sorts, who is able to peel back the madness of real Sada's dream and move against the dark side of her creator's desires. She is the voice of order pushing back against looming chaos. On the other hand, the real Professor Sada was an ambitious idealist who put her purpose, her beautiful but delusional dream, above all else. Essentially, she is the chaos of unchecked dreams and unchecked desires. And it seems that even if she were alive, she would have had very little sympathy for the destruction of present-day Paldea, as AI Sada explains that the original Professor Sada would simply view such destruction as a natural part of life. So where does this leave the original Professor Sada on the moral scale? It is true that her selfish actions would have destroyed the world had she not died and AI Sada had not thereafter intervened, and she even went so far as to program a lethal AI system to prevent such interventions. And if we were to categorize the original Professor Sada as either good or bad, it would be an easy choice for most people. But is Professor Sada completely irredeemable? There's an element of sadness to Sada's character, in that she actually did seem to love her son, as suggested by the treasured photograph of him that she kept in her laboratory, and she seemed to be aware of her own lack of control over her ambitions, thus deciding it best to push Arvin out of her life to keep him safe. And as a make-good, she even brought Koraidon up from the depths of the crater to be a friend to Arvin. It's just that the gesture ended up blowing up in her face, quite literally. And even after that, lost in her delusions though she may have been, she continued to write letters to Arvin, presumably up until her death. At the end of the day, when it comes to the truly ambitious people of the world, even those who become enraptured in selfish, misguided dreams tend to have some goodness in them. And the difference between becoming someone truly great or someone truly terrible can be as simple as being able to push yourself to the brink without losing yourself to the brink. Unfortunately, in the case of Professor Sada, she lost herself, descending so deep into the crater, so deep into the dream, that she could never, ever come back. That crater, the only place wherein we can truly challenge ourselves to bend dreams into reality, to struggle, to grow, to either achieve greatness or fall into the depths of failure. It is the place where anyone who aspires to do great things must go. But without a doubt, it is a place best braved with caution, lest we fall out of balance and descend into the darkest extremities of our wildest desires.